What's up, tribe? How you guys doing? Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I hope you like this video. This is the secret of the Chippendale. The secret of the Chippendale murders. That's it. Season 1, episode 2. Now this is over to the A&E, so y'all make sure y'all check it out. Now we start this episode off. We left off last episode with the Chippendales opening up a club in New York. Right? We have Nick, who's from New York, and he wants to bring the show on the road. He wants to take it to New York. Now, if you don't remember who Nick is the guy who came in and took over, basically directed and promotions and all of that. And he sort of became the face of Chippendales. Now, Steve Banerjee was the original creator and owner of the Chippendales, but because of a variety of reasons, he stayed in the background. One, he had a really bad stutter, and so he really didn't like talking. Two, he was an immigrant, and English wasn't his first language, and so and he wasn't charismatic. Like his language, his words was very, very slow and methodical and very, matter of fact. Nick was, he was a people guy. He was he was very charismatic, and so he played well to the camera. And so that we're gonna get back to that, but that created some tension that you can imagine. The other thing we got last week was that when Nick agreed to, or wanted to take the show to New York, and Steve was cool with that, Nick got Steve to sign off on the traveling version of the Chippendales, which of course there wasn't one at the time. And so it was a napkin. They were at a club or a bar or a restaurant. He signed it on a napkin, and Steve signed off on it. Now, contrary to popular belief, that is a contract. If there's an offer and there's an acceptance of that offer and there's an agreement that everybody's of like mind, that's a contract, and it is legally binding, whether it's written on a receipt, a napkin, or a formal agreement written out on copy paper and printed. So that's going to obviously become a problem later on. But the Chippendales opens up in New York, and baby, it is a hit, okay? It's a bigger hit than even the one in L.A. All of the New York stars come through, the actresses, even the actors. They said the opening night, the doors opened at 6. The show didn't start till 8, so by the time the show started, everybody was drunk because they had been drinking and sipping and dipping and all kinds of stuff. And it was just a hit, and it just exploded. And the Chippendales dancers just became, they became, hits. And a lot of these guys were just everyday guys looking for a job. One guy talked about how, he was on Wall Street and somebody saw him and was like, hey, I think you'd be good for yada, yada, yada. And then another guy was a model, and his modeling agency sent him over. Another guy owned his own construction company, but, the highs and the lows of owning your own business. And so he went looking for just a bartender gig, and, that's what it is. Now, there were very specific criteria for Chippendales dancers, right? They had to be over 6 feet tall. Obviously, they had to be fit and buff and muscular, and, they have to have that Adonis fantasy of what, a woman wanted. Now, here's something very interesting. And we know, and of course, the Chippendales blew up. There was merch everywhere, calendars, which was their like number one seller. But they were also, they had playing cards and T-shirts and posters and all that kind of stuff. Banerjee and Steve and Nick were making money hand over fist. They were on TV shows. All the TV shows had them on there. Donahue, they said, was probably one of their most famous appearances, which was actually their favorite appearance, because they said Donahue didn't treat them like meat. Like, he definitely respected them and what they were doing. But we did find out that they had one black dancer at the time, and he was not somebody that they advertised. He wasn't on any of the merch. He didn't go to any of the talk shows, because Steve felt like, hey, I am marketing to the average white woman in middle America. And the average white woman in middle America doesn't want to come and drool over a black man, right? So was there a little racism in there? Absolutely. But from a business person's point of view, maybe he felt like, he really felt that way. Now, mind you, this is coming from an immigrant. It's coming from a man from India. He's a person of color himself. So it's sort of coming from that mindset of, listen, this is what America wants to see. So, um, but I mean, the black dancer, he's on the documentary and he says, listen, I get it, I understood, and we actually became friends. Me and Steve, we actually became really good friends. He was a good guy, but he was just trying to sell a business, and he knew that at in the early 80s that just wasn't gonna play well. It just was what it was. um there was the religious right, of course. They were attacked from the religious right, who was like, this isn't right, this is very disrespectful to God. And we know the drill, right? Now, baby, that club was a den of sin. Now, all of the dancers talked about how much sex was going on in those clubs, those horny housewives or business women, or bachelorette parties, birthday parties, all that stuff. They would come down, they would get drunk, and they would let their inhibitions flow. Also, we know we had the sexual revolution of the 70s, right? Going into the 80s. And people were just letting it all hang out. And so they said it was sex going on everywhere, child. It was sex going on upstairs, downstairs, outstairs, instairs, in the VIP room, on the rooftop. They said it was sex going on everywhere, okay? They didn't talk a lot about drugs. Now, that doesn't mean that the drugs weren't really there or around, but they didn't talk a lot about the drugs. So, Steve and Nick started having a lot of growing pains as far as being business partners. And it came down to Nick becoming the face of Chippendales, even to the point where people thought that he was actually the creator of Chippendales, and Steve being very upset by that because, of course, who wants to be kicked to the background of their own company, of their own business? And then, of course, we have this napkin that always hangs over our head. Now, during this process, Steve got married and he had 2 children. And his son actually was on the documentary, and they said, people think that I've got it made. People think that I'm so rich and I got so much. And he was like, not really. He said that napkin, which I think we're going to get more into detail about how that ended up screwing Steve in the end. That napkin really kind of screwed my family out of a lot of things that we were entitled to. And so this whole episode is building up to this murder that takes place. And honestly, last week I thought one person had been killed, but the person that I thought had been killed isn't the person who got killed. But anyway, we're going to get there. So when the show started traveling, here's where it really got bad. Because now Steve is 100% cut out of the revenue that is coming off of these road shows. Even though it's still Chippendales, it still carries his name of the company he started or the business he started. But because of this napkin, and what was also said is that English wasn't Steve's first language, and so the written language was even worse. And they feel like maybe Nick really took advantage of Steve in this whole napkin deal, which I could see. I could see that being a problem. When English isn't your first language, it's, first of all, it's always easier. Well, I ain't gonna say always, but in most cases, it's easier to learn how to verbally learn a language than writing a language, right? But the flip side is Steve was a businessman who at this point had, I'm sure, signed 1 million contracts and done business. So I don't know. Like, I could definitely see it from both sides. I don't think that Steve was necessarily totally taken advantage of. Like, he was this, ignorant guy. I mean, by this time, Chippendales was a big business, and you have lawyers, and you have people that read things for you and interpret. So, I don't know. The other person or situation that came into play was the mob. Now, the mob was definitely putting their foot on the necks of the Chippendales, making them pay for protection and things of that nature. And there were definitely stories that the people who worked at Chippendales told about the mob. They said, there was a pizza joint right across the street, and when they would deliver the pizzas, the payment for those pizzas was well above the price of what a pizza should cost. They also said there were times when people just straight up walked in there and was like, "We here to collect." and they were told to go up to the office to speak to Nick to get their collection. So all of this is building up to the murder that we know took place. So what ended up happening that morning was, according to the story that we learned last night, a guy came in asking for Nick. And he actually walked up on the witness and he said, "Are you Nick?" And he said, "No." He said, "Nick is in his office." So the guy actually goes into the bathroom. I don't know if it was to get his nerves together or put the gun together or get himself situated. And then he comes out of the bathroom. He walks into Nick's office and he proceeds to shoot him. Nick actually was able to try to fight the guy off. But ultimately, he had been shot. And so the guy did get away. 911 was called. And Nick didn't survive. He didn't survive his injuries. And so now the question is, who did it? Like, now, was it the mob? Was it Steve? Because they were having such a hard time, and they were rivals. Was it a former employee, a jaded employee? Like, there were so many different options, because they said Nick wasn't the nicest guy to get along with. And so he definitely had enemies. Was it the mob? Did they want to stop paying, or were they not paying enough? So now we're going to, next week we're going to get into the actual investigation and, who did it, how it happened, why it happened, kind of thing. So y'all let me know what y'all think. That's definitely good. I'm here. I'm following it, y'all. Y'all let me know what y'all think. Drop it in the comments. Peace.